Okay, and welcome, Gleam, to our interview process. And want you to just start off by talking about why you're running again.
All right. Well, I think I know most of you, but for those who don't, my name is Gleam Davis. I've been on the City Council since 2009. I'm running again because I believe, like our nation as a whole, Santa Monica is in the midst of a crossroads. We're having to make some hard decisions about where we want to go as a city. We've certainly had a difficult 2020, just like the rest of the nation, and we have some very serious issues to think about. Number one, of course, being the role of peaceful protest and police activity within our community. Number two, making sure that the economic recovery that we plan to have from this COVID-19 crisis is a fair and just economic recovery. And that as we move into that time of recovery, that we continue to build more affordable housing so that we include more people in what I like to think of as the Santa Monica dream, and also reduce the number of people who are living without homes. So that's why I'm running again. I think I'm a thoughtful progressive, and I think I've got a good record on all those issues. And I'd certainly enjoy having the club support, which I've had in the past, having the club support again.
Great, thank you, Gleam. And my first question is, I wanted to ask you, well, you mentioned in your questionnaire that Santa Monica does have some exclusionary zoning policies. So how do you propose that we would confront and remediate those problems, as you put it?
So I think the first thing we need to do is really educate ourselves about the history of zoning in Santa Monica. For example, our much loved Civic Auditorium was built on land that was eminent domained out from under an African-American community. And so I think, one, we need to learn about our history, and two, in terms of remediating it, I think we need to say, okay, if Black Lives Matter, how do we build housing for Black people? I know, for example, that Mayor Kevin McEwen has come up with an interesting idea about giving priority for affordable and other housing to the extent we can to people who are the legacy, the ancestors of the people who were moved out because of the Civic Auditorium and or the 10 freeway or other eminent domain actions. But I think the most important thing we can do is build more housing. If we're going to be an inclusionary community, if we're going to be inclusive, then we want to be as broad as we can in terms of welcoming people to Santa Monica. And if we continue to have zoning laws that discourage the building of more housing, then my concern is that we'll become just a wealthy enclave with some very much needed but limited deed restricted affordable housing. I do think we need to think about whether or not some of our R1 zones over the long term, not tomorrow, but over the long term, we need to think about the fact that many of them abut multifamily zoned areas, and yet property values remained high. So I am not one of those people who is afraid of rethinking some of the zoning in our R1 neighborhoods to determine whether or not we could afford some more multifamily housing that would allow more people of many stripes and colors to move into Santa Monica.
Got it, thank you. Does anyone, Derek, yeah, go ahead.
I have a few questions. Hi, Gleam.
Hey, Derek.
First question is, are you familiar with the 13 item coming up this Tuesday regarding the investigation as to the events on May 31st? And if you are, what are your thoughts on it?
So I just learned of it on Friday because that's when it was added to the agenda. And as I'm no longer mayor, I'm not in agenda planning. I think it's a very good idea to introduce as much independent review as we can, both into the actual after action process, which is the police review of what happened on May 31st and beyond, but also once we get the after action process, which is sort of a just the facts, ma'am situation, what happened, what's the chronology, is to have an independent review about the tactics, the decisions that were made. It broke my heart to see rubber bullets and tear gas used on peaceful protesters. And I would hope that if we have an independent review, we can learn about some changes to policy or maybe better training so that we make better decisions. I would be certainly interested in seeing if we could just ban the use of non-lethal ammunition in any situation where peaceful protesting is involved.
Thank you. My second question is do you support a ban on corporate and furnished housing in Santa Monica?
Yes. That's an easy answer.
Without exception?
Yeah, the only exception that I have, and I've been very clear about this, is, well, let me start out by saying I think West Hollywood did a ban that had some very well-intentioned provisions, but we now know that there were loopholes that people were able to drive trucks through, and we want to avoid that in Santa Monica. The one concern I have is I am all in favor of forcing landlords to offer a 1-year term on a lease, but that if somebody needs to have a shorter term, for example, if your job changes, if you live and work in Santa Monica and then you get transferred to Texas, God forbid, I would hate to see the landlord be able to inflict 6 months rent penalty on somebody for that. So while I think that landlords have to offer 1-year minimum leases, that we shouldn't penalize tenants who need less than 1-year tenancies for whatever reason. So that's the one restriction I would put on it.
Thank you.
Okay, who's next? Amy?
Hi, Gleam. I
Amy.
really appreciate your thoughtfulness in responding to the questionnaire about building a resilient economy and recognizing that there will need to be policy and ordinances that are changed. Do you have some idea of how that can come about and which ones you would focus on?
So a couple of the things I would focus on, first of all, would be making sure that we remove whatever unnecessary roadblocks there are to businesses expanding their operations or opening in the first place. We all have heard horror stories of someone who wants to open a very simple business, a small restaurant or a retail establishment, where it takes them a year or even more than a year to just get the necessary permits, get inspections done and things like that. So one of the ideas I had was, what if we put a time limit on it that say, if you're a commercial building and you're going to open up, if you don't have this inspection within 90 days, we have to refund your inspection fees. Or if you don't have this permit within 6 months, whatever metrics we set up, then we're going to refund your permitting fees. In other words, make the city have some skin in the game and the time it takes to get businesses open or when they're doing remodels, that sort of thing. I also think we need to be a little bit more flexible on some of our ordinances. We've done that on an emergency basis with Main Street al fresco and some of that. And I think what we need to do is look at that and say, look how well that's working, or where's it working well, where is it not working well, and then make those ordinances permanent and permanently change the way our streets operate so that they further enhance small business, small retail, restaurants, that sort of thing. So I think we need to expedite the process for businesses, and I also think we need to think outside the box about the use of open space, because I'm afraid we're going to be in this pandemic for a while. And I think if we tie it completely to this is only 60 or 90 days, we've already started to lose small businesses, and I don't want to lose any more. So those are a couple of the thoughts I have.
Thank you. Ed?
Hi, Gleam.
Hi.
We've asked the same question of other candidates for council, so we're going to ask it of you as well. The main objection to the condos seems to be the loss of revenue of TOT to the city from that. So the question is, let's just hypothetically assume that that is the only objection to the Miramar. If the Miramar were to give the city the value of what that TOT would be for those condos, would that remove any objection from you for having those condos on there?
Well, I don't know how we would, I mean, I'm assuming that you're thinking that if people were to Airbnb the condos and we would get the TOT that way from the condos?
Well, no,
generally,
the TOT amount could be concluded by any kind of metric all sides would agree to. The point is, if that value, that agreed to value of what the TOT might be over any extended period of time, if the Miramar agreed to pay that to the city on a regular basis, as they pay TOT on all of the other rooms, would that remove the objection of the condos from your plan?
so I may be misunderstanding. So it's my understanding, let me try and see if I'm parroting back what you're asking, because I want to be sure I answer the right question. Right now, they include condos, and it's my understanding that those condos are paying for the cost of renovation as well as the building of affordable housing. And you're asking that if we could get the money from another source, or if the Miramar just paid us instead of the profits from the condos, would I be okay with getting rid of the condos? And of course, the answer is yes. There are a lot of benefits to the Miramar project. It's an ugly hotel that was built in a time when hotels were walling themselves off from the community. And I think not only is it the ability to upgrade the hotel, but to free the Moreton Bay Fig from being the world's largest traffic cone into actually being a true recognized and cherished landmark in our city, as well as building significant affordable housing and creating more open space are all good things. If we can do that without the condos, then I am not wedded in any way, shape, or form to the condos. It's just...
Let me make this a little more specific. If the city received the TOT value of those condos, would you object to the condos? Right now, the objection is the city is not going to get any TOT from those condos. That's the objection to the condos. So if the city got that same value, would you agree to leave the condos there, or would you object to them being there?
I'm not wedded to the idea of condos. So if the city got the same TOT value without building the condos and they were able to go through with the project, then if they said we're going to do it without condos, I'm fine with that. I wouldn't say, oh my God, no, you must build condos. That's not one of the reasons I support the project, at least presumptively. I haven't voted on it yet, and I have a lot more to hear. I know we have financial analyses coming, but I'm inclined to support it because of the reasons I just mentioned. But none of those reasons were the condos. So if we could get all the other benefits, the affordable housing, the open space, the renovation of what is an ugly walled-off hotel, the other community benefits from the project without the condos, I would be fine with not having the condos. That's not an issue for me. It's not like I feel we need to build a lot more condos, but it's my understanding their claim is that the condos are what finance the rest of the project, but we haven't seen the financial analysis yet. So I'll have to wait to see. If we can do it without the condos, I'm fine with that.
Great. And let's go to Amy, got another one.
Thank you, John, for letting me ask a second question. This one is about the Black agenda. We found that in some discussion over legislative priorities, actually coming from going forward through the state, that many times people of color may have issues with past debt or incarceration or something like that that prevents them from even getting a foothold in a job or career. And I was wondering, is the city considering taking a look at some of those conditions and removing them from hiring or opportunities where experience can be gained for future employment in areas that are related to city government?
So let me start out by saying I believe in ban the box, which is we shouldn't ask people about their prior experiences in the criminal justice system. What you mentioned is exactly why I made the motion that was passed by council to take at least 10% of the funds from the We Are Santa Monica Fund, which is designed to help us through economic recovery and recovery from the civil uprising on May 31st and beyond, and devote that to the Black agenda, because I think that can be a source of money, for example, to pay off fines, to create mentorship programs for all sorts of businesses from disadvantaged communities. That's why when we address the issue of 4th and 5th in Arizona, the Plaza Project, one of the things I asked is for them to dedicate a certain percentage of what now is the commercial portion of that project to below market rents that can serve the disadvantaged community, so that African-American, Black, brown, whatever, female entrepreneurs have access to Class A office space at below market rents, because we know that sometimes people just get judged on their address. And so I thought that by adding that, and by the way, if anyone wants to contribute more than 10% of their donation to the We Are Santa Monica Fund, I also made it possible that up to 100% of your donation to the We Are Santa Monica Fund can go to the Black agenda. So I think those are very solid points. One of the other things I think is really important is working with our local businesses when we have these resources to create just mentorship and networking programs. We know, for example, with the PPP program at federal level, it was the lack of banking relationships that caused Black and other businesses from being able to access those funds. And so if we have a mentorship program where existing businesses work with up and coming businesses or businesses from the disadvantaged community and help create those relationships so that when things like this happen, they can walk into the bank and go, hey, Fred, you know me, we've been doing business for 5 years, I want to get a PPP loan. it's not out of the blue. We just know that sometimes it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I think helping disadvantaged businesses build those relationships is really key. But what you said is exactly why I think we need to have actual money on the ground resources dedicated to the Black Lives Agenda matter to do things like pay off fines that might prevent people from being able to participate in the economy. As we've seen in Florida, where they're trying to use the existence of unpaid criminal justice system fees to keep people from voting, that sort of thing. So it's not just enough to have the agenda, you have to have the money to make the agenda work. And I'm all in favor of making sure we have that money to make the agenda work. Oh,
I think you're muted, John, but are you calling on me?
Do you have another question?
I do.
Okay, go ahead, and then we'll wrap it up.
Oh, okay. What I was going to say is there's a lot of development in Santa Monica. And a lot of this development, every time it goes up, it appears to many that the overwhelming majority of those apartments are $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month, which means that you have to make well into the six figures to afford to live there. The question is, how do we get, if we're going to do this development, how do we get the developers or whoever to offer affordable housing to people who really at this point can't afford to live here but should have access to this city?
well, and that's a question we wrestle with every day. I keep talking about the taffy pull, where we're a very affluent community on one end, and we've done a pretty good job of building deed-restricted affordable housing on the other. But it's like a taffy pull. It's very thin in the middle. We're not building middle-income housing, that sort of thing. Where do our teachers live? Where does the guy who owns the local dry cleaners live? Where do our nurses live? That sort of thing. So I think there are three things we can do. The first thing we can do is use city land for the development of housing. Looking at you parking structures 1 and 3 and 2 and maybe even 4. And there's some other city parcels along throughout the city where the city owns the land and it will have to be dispersed with according to the Surplus Lands Act, but we can ask for people to build more affordable housing, not necessarily deed restricted, although that should be a component, that should permanent supportive, but really across the board housing. 2, I think the thing we need to do is just continue to build more housing. I think we need to build more housing, particularly along our boulevards, Santa Monica and Wilshire, and in the east end of town, Bergamot Station, or that area, which are formerly industrial lands, because by building more housing, you actually create more affordability. It's a sort of an interesting economic phenomenon, but it means that the more house supply and demand, the more housing you have, prices can stabilize or maybe even in some instances go down. And I think the other important side effect of that is it reduces the development pressure in our existing residential neighborhoods so that we're not taking out the affordable housing that does exist now, whether it's rent control housing or just older housing that tends to be more affordable. So I think if we have a comprehensive housing policy that says, let's use city lands to build more affordable housing, let's build more housing that will just generate market pressures to keep housing affordable, and let's take the pressures off our current residential neighborhoods that do have some affordable housing in them, we can do a much better job. The other thing we need to do, quite honestly, is make sure that our neighbors throughout the region support building more housing. Unfortunately, we have some municipal neighbors down in the South Bay who are rejecting their obligation to build more housing. And that puts more pressure on the Santa Monica market. If as a region, we could adopt a more comprehensive, better build more housing policy, then we might not have to try and house everyone in Santa Monica. And we might find that housing prices throughout the region might stabilize or even go down. So I think, controlling what's built on city land, building more housing, and then protecting existing affordable housing are all key to making sure that people can continue to afford to live in Santa Monica.
But it's your opinion at this point, I mean, I think you said it, that up to this point, Santa Monica's been good at offering affordable housing?
We've built a lot of deed-restricted affordable housing. And deed-restricted affordable housing can go up to the moderate level. We've certainly done more than most municipalities in our area. We have one of the strongest inclusionary housing laws. But have we built enough? Absolutely not. And our regional housing needs assessment says we need to build literally 6,000 more affordable housing units. That's a big ticket item. So have we done well? Compared to most communities, yes. Have we done enough? Absolutely not, and we need to do more.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Thanks. Gleam. Appreciate you coming by.
Well, thanks. If I can just make one final statement, since I filled out the questionnaire, I wanted you all to know that I have been endorsed by the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor. You had asked about organizations, and they were in the midst of their process, and I couldn't spill the beans. So now I'm spilling the beans, and I want to thank you all and tell you how great it is to see you on Zoom, and looking forward to getting together in person when we're all through this.
So are we. Thanks so much, Gleam. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.